Eric, how you doing today?
Mr. Dave Bergstrom, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's good to see you again. I'm glad we're shooting another video today. And today we wanted to talk about a really important topic, and that is getting your assets in gear.
Boom, getting your assets in gear. And you came up with that title. I think it's so perfect because a lot of people think of buying their first home kind of similar to renting. That's a monthly payment. But it's not a monthly payment. It's a balance sheet item. It's an asset that also has maybe a liability associated with it if you have a loan. But we're going to focus on the asset side of the equation because you already have a liability if you're paying rent, correct?
Right, absolutely. And you're not getting any return on your investment. There is no asset that you're getting a return on when you're renting a home.
100%. So I think a lot of folks get focused on what they're paying per month. And if you're buying a home earlier in life, you haven't built up maybe a lot of other financial assets. And this is going to be a big step. Rent's a big step, let alone, buying a home might be a big step. But people focus on the monthly payment. And we would encourage that people focus on the asset side that might come with a liability, but the liability goes down over time on a mortgage and almost in all cases goes up as an asset.
Absolutely. And people will say, well, we will say, buy a house as a home and not as an investment. But you do have to look at it from the asset side of things, because to your point, and again, we've covered this before, but if you look historically in almost every county in the country, you've seen some form of appreciation over time, right? And there can be volatility. You can have dips here and there that, for 1 month or 1 quarter at a time. But if you look at a, 50-year average, let's say, of home price appreciation, it's almost in every case gone up consistently year over year.
That is very, very true. And there is basically one exception, and that was the housing-driven crash of 15, 18 years ago. That was a one-time event, has no relation to today's marketplace. There was an oversupply and overconstruction of homes, and everyone can kind of know what that feels like. If shoes go on sale at the store, it's because they have extra shoes that they're trying to get out for the season. That happened in real estate back then. That is not happening today.
And, lending was on a whole different platform back then as well. And there was loans being made that shouldn't have been made. There was people claiming to make money they didn't actually make, and they could never qualify actually for the home unless it was at that, 1% interest rate that they were claiming was going to last forever. That didn't, of course. Negative amortization. I mean, you talk about all kinds of the crazy things that we were doing in lending at that time. So that's definitely gone away. And wouldn't you say that the housing market, as far as the appreciation rates and home values, have more than recovered since then?
Oh my gosh, well, they have only been recovering since then or exceeding past where they had been ever before. And I think that just continues into today. Going back just a few years ago, a couple years ago, there was all this talk about a housing meltdown, a housing crash, because unsophisticated analysis would go, well, when prices went up too fast, they should go down. However, this market's entirely different. You have very limited supply of new homes on the marketplace. Those homes are selling, and so there's no pressure to have a reduction in value of the asset, the house. There's also the case where people's financing is very safe. It's the safest it has ever been at those lower interest rates and these higher equity positions that people have in homes. So there's no fire sale. There's no need to just get out of a situation. People can prepare themselves and get out and sell a house if they'd like to, but not under a fire sale condition because there's no motivation for that.
Yeah, I remember that visual of, literally people walking out of their house and throwing the keys on the roof and just letting it be. And obviously that led to a giant crash in home values during the crisis. So, but yeah, we've definitely recovered from that. So
100%.
We talked about, again, getting your assets in gear. So, talk about that a little bit, because again, we kind of covered already the fact that, if you're renting a home right now and you really want to buy a home, why are people waiting, and why shouldn't they wait? And how can they get into a home today instead of waiting?
So first off, I think there's this idea that buying a real estate piece of property is timing. And we would like to reverse that and just go, the timing's now. If you can afford it and if you want to buy a home, do it now, because that same home will be worth more money in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. And any kind of waiting for the interest rates, you're paying rent at that point up until the time that you buy. And now you've waited to where you have to pay a lot more for that asset, that house, that property, versus what you could do today. And you can always refinance, but you cannot refinance a purchase price.
Right, right. Yeah, you can't go backwards in time and buy the house for last year's price next year, right? Yeah,
Right.
that's a really good point. And I think we've seen that. So we've seen two things. One, you've heard some of the news that well, housing prices are going to go down. We haven't seen that happen. We've been hearing that for a couple of years now. We haven't seen that happen. Obviously, during the pandemic, home prices, skyrocketed across the whole country. But we've seen it slow down, certainly, but we haven't seen it go the other direction, right? And the other thing people are waiting for is, we heard at the beginning of the year that the Fed was going to cut interest rates 6 times during the year. And here we are almost mid-June. And how many of those cuts have we seen so far, Eric?
Well, there was anticipation that in 2023 we would see some cuts, and we're into 2024, about halfway through the year. And now the question is, well, we might have some cuts, based on news that actually has come out today. There may be a cut later this year, but we're not talking a vast reduction in interest rates.
And in the meantime, you're losing some appreciation in that home based on what you could buy the home for today versus what it may go for in 6 months or a year from now, if that home's still available.
Well, and a lot of people have this interesting concept around buying a home. The house appreciation goes up based upon the house, not against any financing you have on it. So if you put a little bit down and it goes up, you could have a high rate of return on the amount of money that you put into the house as the down payment, as the closing, but then also whatever the monthly payments are. If you had no loan against the house, it's still going to go up at the same amount, right? So it's still going to appreciate at the same rate. And people get confused as to, well, I need to save up for this type of down payment, or I need to do these things. And that's not necessarily the case. You need to get on the bus. You need to take the elevator and start going up, because if you wait, for a while, you're just going to start taking that elevator at a different set point in purchase price.
Absolutely. And, I mean, neither one of us are encouraging people to take on an obligation as far as buying a home that they can't truly afford, right? And we've got underwriting guidelines around that to make sure that people aren't getting to a house they can't afford. But the home will become more affordable if you can afford it now. If you can afford to make the payment now, it's only going to become more affordable as the rates come down and you actually refinance. Typically, what you see is that with home price appreciation, you also see an increase in income. So just with that, you can see the home become more affordable. But there's also a couple of things, product-wise, that makes the payment more affordable for the borrower as well. And one of those is a buy down. And the buy down product is misunderstood by a lot of people because there's actually two different ways. There's two different buy down types. There's a permanent buy down and there's a temporary buy down. And it's not too complicated, but there's big differences. So a permanent buy down would be where you paid down your interest rate permanently. So you do a 30-year loan and you buy the interest rate down from 7% to 6%, you would have a 6% rate for 30 years, 360 payments, right? But on a temporary buy down, you're actually buying the rate down, like it says, on a temporary basis. And so, for example, a 2% buy down or a 2-1 temporary buy down, you would buy the rate down 2% for the first year, 1% for the second year, and then at the third year, it would be at that note rate for years 3 through 30. So again, in the case we just used, or example we just used, so you'd buy the rate down from 7% to 5% the first year. You'd make your payment at 5% for the first year, 6% for the second year, and then 7% years 3 through 30. The big difference is that a temporary buy down is much less expensive and more likely to be paid by the seller or to request that as part of your purchase transaction. Whereas a permanent buy down is expensive. So, for example, let's say it costs 1% of your loan amount for a permanent buy down and you're borrowing $500,000. That'll be $50,000 to buy the rate down from 7% to 6%. Whereas if you did a temporary buy down and for the first and second year, I'd have to do the calculations, but let's say it's probably going to be closer to about 12 or $15,000. And that's a lot more palatable for the seller to pay as a seller concession than the permanent buy down. And again, why would you want to do a permanent buy down at that expense if you're planning on refinancing in a year when rates hopefully are going to go down?
So true. So it depends on where you believe you are in your income picture. Are you a younger buyer and this is your first house and your income's, on the way up? Are you with a mature income that's kind of already established and holding tight? Are you going to have less income over time? Are you starting to wind things down or just whatever the situation is? So some of those things take into account how long you might be in the home, how long that payment may be a factor in terms of this feels like a big chunk of obligation, up front. But a lot of people, that are earlier in their careers, maybe, just a couple years into their job, but they're in the ramp up phase of, establishing higher rates of compensation. You take that temporary buy down, it's a stair step, most literally, in terms of easing your way into what the obligations are for the monthly payment for that house. You're still amortizing the loan, right? You're still, it's all still getting against the 30-year schedule if it's a 30-year fixed. And so there's no fake building back, your loan balance in a negative amortization situation here that may sound kind of like, 15, 20 years ago type stuff. This is a true buy down of the interest rate to where you are on plan in that stair step, versus the long-term buy down. This may be your last stop. This may be something where you have some extra money that you just want to invest in the interest rate now. You don't want to wait for interest rates to fall down or come down a little bit in the future. There's obviously, you and I, Dave, are talking. We've been in this business a long time. There's a lot of understanding that we may have some lower interest rates in our future. We're in, June of 2024, but there's no guarantee. We've all been surprised over time. So we're not guaranteeing any kind of future forecast here, but in the life cycles of where we've seen things, there is some understanding that we have a recessionary, picture ahead of us that will potentially have a lowering of interest rates. So you can buy into that now and just not worry about it. You could do a stair step, a temporary buy down and ease your way into the cost of owning a home.
Yeah, good point. And really, regardless of what happens with interest rates in 1 month, 6 months, a year, whatever the case is, if you get into that asset today, that home today, and we do see continued appreciation in home values, and you have that loan, so you have the home value appreciating over time, you have your loan balance decreasing over time through amortization. And so you see the value of that asset or that investment start to pay off again with you just making your normal monthly payments. So that's a great idea.
And the other thing about this whole idea of get your assets in gear is that this is a balance sheet equation, not just an income statement equation. So this isn't just looking at what do I bring in on a monthly basis and what do I outflow on a monthly basis. That's important, especially maybe if you're reestablishing yourself or you don't have a lot of equity, to bring from one sale of a home into another. This is all very serious stuff. The income component of it matters. But the asset side is where the power play is. And I think people focus too much on the income and expenses versus the asset play. That's the long-term value of owning real estate that basically, it's been super rare that I've seen people get in trouble from having building equity in their house.
Right. Well, and we've seen too, we're seeing some cash out transactions currently. one of them is to pay down some consumer debt that seems to be growing over time, right? Because people are holding on to their asset value, their 3 or 3.5% interest rate they've got in their home, but we've seen this huge escalation in credit card debt over time at 20 or 25% interest rates, and so it's just really hampering people. But on the other hand, too, is that we're seeing some cash out transactions for people that have a lot of equity in their homes that don't want to sell their homes because they value that asset they're holding on to, but they're pulling cash out of their home, which they can, to buy either another property or to buy an investment property and retain this one as an investment property to buy a new home as well.
You're bringing up an amazing point, and that is that there's a lot of equity that people have built in their homes. And this is that whole blended rate, interest rate kind of concept. Now, you have to be fair here. If you have a car loan for 3 years remaining and you place that into a 30-year mortgage, you're obviously extending the term out, but you might be really helping yourself on a cash flow basis. You might have freed up more money than to pay more money against the mortgage and pay it over a lesser amount of time by paying the principal down faster. You might be freeing things up a little differently. We're not talking about people doing real risky cash outs and real risky equity positions left over after a refinance. We're talking about the smart play where you've built up some equity, you have other needs, you have to look at the whole picture and potentially replace a really good mortgage that's on the property now with a little bit higher interest rate mortgage that fixes the rest of your financial picture.
And that's where a professional mortgage advisor comes into play that can help you to look at both your short and your long-term goals. Because I have seen that mistake before. People that, I'm going to roll in my $10,000 car balance to my house, and now you're paying $10,000 for a car loan over a 30-year period, right? But there's ways to do that too. You can still continue to make the same payment that you were making on the car loan at a higher interest rate, make that towards your mortgage now. And like you said, you're going to pay off that mortgage that much quicker.
So that's the balance sheet play versus just thinking about what I spend on a monthly basis, or taking the new mortgage, rolling debt into it, and then spending that cash that you've freed up in other ways that maybe don't have a good balance sheet play. So there's lots of ways to look at this, and you're right, the mortgage advisor concept, a financial advisor, a CPA, all these folks can help out and help you understand where am I at today? How could I clean up this picture or do something I'd like to do? Maybe you've just retired and you still have income, you still qualify. You want to buy that RV, you want to buy that toy that's kind of an asset, and this could be a way to do that, and then have it all be part of the picture. We don't advocate just buying stuff and then using your house as equity to cover up that expenditure and then do it again and do it again. That's not the asset play.
Right. But, to your point too, another thing that a professional mortgage advisor can do for you is introduce you to a financial advisor. So, as you build equity in the home, you're probably going to be building assets in other areas as well. And that's why it's really nice to work with a professional that can actually make those introductions for you if you don't have one already, to help build your other assets as well and to build your balance sheet.
Well, what's interesting, the mortgage professional is in an interesting place in the financial sector in that we see the entire picture, right? We see what everyone's income is, what their expenses are, what their liquid assets, what their investment accounts look like, this whole entire picture and how that could relate to the housing, financing that we're looking at, or the housing acquisition or the replacement of debt on a house. But we look at the whole picture, and then we have relationships with professionals that could then help someone go, hey, I have these goals. I've got this 5, 10, 15-year plan. I'd like to talk with someone about that. And we're not necessarily financial planners. We can assess and help people with the place that they're at trying to do financing, but we can also identify that there might be an opportunity to consider things a little bit differently financially.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say if nothing else, we're definitely relationship managers, right? And have a lot of relationships in a lot of different areas that we can help our borrowers with.
Well, when I was doing loans, I kind of looked at myself as a switchboard operator where, hey, someone has this need and I've got this person over here. Let's make that connection. And there was a lot of mutual benefit off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of reciprocation.
Yep.
Awesome, Eric. Well, I think that was a great discussion on getting your assets in gear. And I think it's really timely right now with so many people sitting on the sidelines and again, either waiting for home prices to go down, which we aren't seeing, or rates to go down, which we really aren't seeing either. We're hoping that sometime in the near future we'll see that, but I guess there's no time like the present, right?
There's no time like the present, and I think growing your assets is actually a really good thing with real estate. And when you're ready, if you're able, if you've decided to buy a house, waiting is generally not the right thing to do. Get in the game, because that purchase price, you have to look at that. Not just the interest rates, not just the monthly payment at a period in time, but rather what that purchase price is. And if you're going to be putting down a relative down payment, over the next 3 years, you're going to put down 5%, 10%, whatever that case is. Yeah, that's going to grow a little bit, but the amount you borrowed is going to grow a lot more if you wait. And so that's, I think, what people need to look at is this asset play.
Absolutely. Awesome, Eric. Well, great job. Good to see you as always, and looking forward to the next discussion.
Thanks, Dave. It was fun.
See you soon.
See ya.